I love to say when it's time to start, all the important people are here. So without further ado, my name is Kate Derniker. I'm on the planning committee for the Contemporary Writers Series, and tonight it's my pleasure to introduce Luis Rodriguez. He joins us tonight for the second gathering of this year's Contemporary Writers Series and comes to West Michigan as an author. That alone is no small feat. His 1993 memoir called Always Running, La Vida Loca, Gang Days in LA, won lots of attention and awards, including a Chicago Sun-Times Book Award. He's also author of the brandy new, just-released memoir, It Calls You Back, an odyssey through love, addiction, revolutions, and healing. In addition to his nonfiction writing, he authors poetry, fiction, and children's literature. In addition to his considerable work as a writer, Mr. Rodriguez is also a noted activist and leader. From the seeds of his own difficult past, he looked beyond reality and saw the possibilities both for himself and others. He is a noted gang intervention specialist in the United States, Mexico, and Central America. In 2001, 3 decades into his work in that area, he published his other nonfiction book, titled Hearts and Hands, Creating Community in Violent Times. His life, as seen from the perspective of 2011, bubbles with the brightness of success. But the bright light Rodriguez brings to his work comes from a very, very dark side. I have met him only briefly yesterday, giving him his quick ride from the airport to the hotel. But I've also spent hours with him through his writing, reading about his life. Luis Rodriguez, and by the way, that's Luis, not Louis or Louise, he says. He knows his topics: gangs, poverty, struggle, inequity, and all the physical and emotional charge that comes with them. In fact, the explicit content in Always Running earned it a place on the American Library Association's list of 100 most banned books in America. Maybe one of the most succinct ways to introduce you to this man and his work is to borrow his words from a June interview this year that I found online. He said, "Gangs exist when there are lots of empties in a person, in family and community. It points out how we need to do more to bring real art, passions, teachings, caring, and resources into the emptiness of young people's lives. Gangs, of course, are also tied to suicide, rage, abandonment, abuse at home, neglect, etc. The crazy life becomes a chain, a web that holds a young person so that his own will and personal power does not matter anymore. If young people had love, hope, true education, the arts, full and meaningful lives, they won't join gangs. My life since living the gang and drug life has been directed to making positive what it means to be Chicano, human, man, woman, and on how to draw out the imagination and creativity that all people have. One way this has manifested is at one of the many organizations Mr. Rodriguez has helped incubate, and that is in Chicago's Guild Complex, which his publicist describes as one of the largest literary arts organizations in the Midwest. This makes sense, I think, when you know that things turned for this man when he found teachers and the power of words back in his late teens. To quote Always Running, he was invited by some new friends to study the dynamics of social revolution. They talked, he said, about, quote, the social processes governing events in the world. I looked strangely at the book in front of me as someone read a passage out loud. I only saw contorted faces on the page, mouths wailing and eyes filled with terror. I saw what I was living. From there, he made his way into the world of writing, teaching, living free of gangs and drugs. He became a leader. His life since living La Vida Loca has not always been smooth or easy, but I think he wouldn't really want it that way. He tells me that he still drives down to East LA from his home in California sometimes to write, that it's just too quiet at home. He takes his message to prisons, juvenile detention facilities, universities, migrant camps, Native American reservations, conferences, public and private schools, and homeless shelters. He addresses the complex but vital issues of race, class, gender, and personal rage through dialogue, story, poetry, and art. We are honored to have with us tonight someone who really gets what it is to give back. work that has been recognized by no less than His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who named our speaker one of just 50 people worldwide as an unsung hero of compassion. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Luis Rodriguez.
Thank you. I'm so glad to see so many people come out. Before I start the reading, I want to share with you a short 2.5-minute trailer. You just have to turn your heads. This is for a film and book project we're going to do out of my cultural space. I do have a space in LA called Tia Chucha Centro Cultural and Bookstore. And just to give you a little bit of background, there's 500,000 people in the Northeast San Fernando Valley, which you probably don't know what that is, but San Fernando Valley is a huge area, close to 1.5 million people, but the Northeast is the Mexican side of the valley. And when we moved there about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, my wife grew up in that area. We found that there was no bookstores, no movie houses, no art galleries, no cultural spaces for 500,000 people. So we created the space, and now we're trying to do this film to document how the arts is transforming this community, but it's really about all communities. So let's share. I want to share this real quickly, and then I'll come right back. Showing that, and it kind of leads into what I'm going to be talking or reading from. I want to share with you some poems. You guys want to hear some poetry? Okay. And I'm going to really be reading from my new memoir, which just came out. So she's going to turn that down. So you don't have to have the soundtrack behind me. I just wanted to say that this is the work that I do now. I totally believe in the arts. I believe in the power of it. I know that in general, people think that the arts are probably frivolous, a waste of time. I know because people are throwing money away from it, pulling money out. Arts programs in schools are being cut. I think that is really wrong. I think the arts are vital because besides the hunger that we have in our physical needs, there's a hunger inside of us. And the arts is one of the most powerful means to meet that hunger. And I think it's important because you got to address it. I find that one of the way that I work with gang kids, some of the most troubled kids, is through the arts, primarily through writing and poetry, which is what I do. But I find that it's powerful, and I've seen the power of it. So I'm going to just read you a poem that I wrote when I was in jail. Some of you know from, if you read some of my work, you know that I spent many years in gangs, many years as a heroin addict, and many years in and out of different jails. And I started really early on when I was about 7 years old, stealing, fighting, getting in a lot of trouble. At 10 years old, my best friend was killed, and that impacted me a lot. And then at 11, I joined a gang. By 12, I was using drugs, including heroin, and I kept going back and forth. But I found something in the arts through poetry, through writing. I didn't know what I was doing, but I felt a compelling need to put down my thoughts and my stories. So I was sitting in jail. I was 16 years old. I was put in murder's row in LA. And I had a cell next to Charles Manson. You all remember Charles Manson? Yeah, he was going to trial at the time. They were trying to get us for these murders that I had nothing to do with, but it didn't matter. They got about half a dozen of us, and 3 people were murdered, and it was a big riot, and they were going to get us for it. And they really couldn't charge me, but in the meantime, I was sitting in this jail, and I started to write my first, I can't call them poems, but I might as well call them poems. I didn't know what they were. I'm going to read you something that I wrote then, even though I fixed it up years later. I have to disclose. It wasn't really well done then, but that kernel of it was here, and I'm going to share it with you, and it's called The Calling, because I really felt that somehow I was being called to this passion, to this practice. And I think all of us get called into our lives, and sometimes we don't know it, sometimes we miss it, sometimes we're not paying attention. We all have a special calling in this world, and I want to share with you, and it goes like this. The calling came to me while I languished in my room, while I withered away my youth in jail cells and damp patio fields. It brought me to life out of captivity in a street-scarred and tattooed place I called body. Until then, I waited silently, a deafening clamor in my head, voiceless to all around, hidden from America's eyes, a brown boy without a name. I would sing into a solitary tape recorder, music never to be heard. I would write my thoughts in scrambled English. I would take photos in my mind, plan out new parks, bushy green, concrete free, new places to play and think. Waiting, Then it came, the calling. It brought me out of my room. It forced me to escape night captors and street prisons. It called me to war, to be writer, to be scientist, and march with the soldiers of change. It called me from the shadows, out of the wreckage of my barrio, from among those who did not exist. I waited all of 16 years for this time. Somehow, unexpected, I was called. So, it's difficult to meet your calling, and it should be, I guess. Because if it wasn't difficult, we'd all get there, right? We'd all be happy. We'd all be great human beings. The struggle is to meet the calling, but also to find the character to carry your art. Because I know a lot of talented, amazing people who just didn't develop the courage, the character to be able to carry it. You know what I'm saying? And that's part of it, too. It took me a long time, and I'm not sure I totally got it right yet, but I'm trying to develop that character. But this whole book is, it calls you back as a sequel to Always Running. Some of you are familiar with, how many of you actually read Always Running or know about it? Okay, some of you aren't, so I'm going to just real quickly share it with you. This is the memoir that's most well-known of all my writings. I have all these books and poetry, children's books, and fiction, nonfiction. Some people don't know that I've written anything but this. So it's sold of like 400,000 copies. It's a very popular book in certain communities. I know that in the LA Public Library system, they tell me it's the most checked out book and also the most stolen book. So, which I actually appreciate a little bit more. But anyway, so it's well known, but it kind of ends when I'm leaving the gang life. This book starts there. It starts when I'm leaving jail for the last time. It starts when I'm trying to leave heroin for the last time. And it ends, because the whole book, this book and this one talks about my relationship with my kids, particularly my oldest son, who also joined a gang, who also got involved with violence, was also in jails. In fact, he ended up going to prison and did a total of 15 years from the age of 17 to 35. It ends when he's getting out released from prison last summer. So there's a lot that goes on between when I get out of this life and when he's getting out. By the way, he's doing very well, my son Ramiro. I'm really proud of him, considering everything he's been through. So I'm going to share with you a few things from this book, maybe a couple poems more, and then I want to open it up to you to talk with me, because I would rather that we have this dialogue about some of these issues. I'm going to hit hardcore. Are you guys ready? Okay. I'll start with the very the first chapter. You'll be back. These were the words I heard as I walked away from the clanging locks and gates, the incessant yells and howls of the downtown Los Angeles County Jail. A sheriff's deputy taunted me with these words after I bailed out from being held on resisting arrest and assaulting police officers. If convicted, I'd do a minimum of 6 years in the state penitentiary. The year was 1973. The charges stemmed from the police beating of a handcuffed young Mexican woman lying on her stomach in the parking lot of an after-hours club. Several deputies were striking and kicking her as she screamed for help. The few drunkards around sauntered away. I was high on heroin, alcohol, pills. I used to like combining those damn things. I turned to walk away as well, but something in me wouldn't let me. At 18 years of age, I felt tired, lost, after having been forced to move away from my neighborhood in a garage where I had lived in a small room with a piss bucket and bunk, and where I got high with street girls I called squeezes. I did something no true gangster would do. I tried to stop the beating. In the process, the deputies jumped me. I wanted to fight back, but I got laid out fast, flat onto the ground, maced and handcuffed. Before being taken to the sheriff's substation while immobilized, I was driven around a few blocks as 2 deputies punched me. I yelled, "Pinche chota, you'll never break me, man." Or I thought I did. Maybe most of this was in my head. So that's my first part of the book, getting into what I had to do to change my life. I don't want to get into all of it because you should read the book, but anyway, I do want to read a little bit some sections about it just so you get an idea about some of the things I had to deal with. One is I got very active in the social movements of the 60s and 70s. That's what really pulled me out. The writing became my practice and my art, but the cause became changing the world. And I took it very seriously, and I put everything behind it like I did the gang. I put everything behind the gang. And I even did with drugs, and then I ended up doing it with this, which is fine. This is a lot better. But still, I had a big problem with my family who were not into what I was doing. And so I'm going to read you a section about the problem I had with my own family. My dad was a Republican, and now I just have to tell you this. For most Mexicans, that's a very hard thing to be. Most of them either became Democrats or were not involved in politics. My dad really bought into the American dream. That was his whole thing. He came from Mexico, and he says, I'm never going back. But unfortunately, I think he did it in a very unhealthy way. His way of doing it was to buy a house that he couldn't afford, buy a car that he couldn't afford, get stuff he couldn't afford. We went bankrupt. One time we lost the house, we lost the car, we lost everything. He was constantly doing that. I think he fell into the material end of it. You know what I'm saying? And it was a big mistake on his part, and it really hurt the family because we were constantly being pushed back. But one of the things that he didn't like is that I became very active in politics. So I'm going to read you this one thing. You could not find an apple as far away from the tree as I was from my father. We disagreed about many things, but mostly we disagreed about politics. My father made his final trip to Los Angeles from Mexico when he was in his early 40s and I was 2 years old. By then, Dad had 8 children with 3 different women. Embittered with Mexico's poverty and seemingly insurmountable corruption, he brought my mother and his last family to the United States, buying whole hog into the American dream. But once in Los Angeles, my dad's Mexican credentials were worthless. He was actually a biology teacher, and he was actually principal of a high school. He had to find work in dog food plants, construction, paint factories. On weekends, he sold insurance, pots and pans, and Bibles. Despite several false starts, including getting evicted a few times, going bankrupt, losing a home, we finally bought a house, a modest wood-frame 2-bedroom for a family of 6, making us one of the few Mexican families to own one in the area. Dad fell for the materialistic appeal of American capitalism. He dealt with growing debt by getting into more debt. He had liens and mortgages on the house and bought services, cars, and things we didn't need. One example is he got those, you know how they were doing those attics where they were throwing those, I don't know what they call them, where they just throw that insulation, but it's done out of piping. He went, foam insulation. He went and bought that. We had no attic. People showed up with the truck. Anyway, that's how crazy he was about this. He also had little emotional connection with his children. He was a hard guy to figure out, to influence, even to love. When I first got involved in community organizing, my father and I often debated. About unions, he hated them. Civil rights, he felt people should stop complaining. And who should run the country? He loved Richard Nixon. One time, my dad asked me to attend a meeting of a conservative political group. West San Gabriel Valley, which was actually part of the East LA area, at the time had many middle-class, upwardly mobile white communities next to very poor Mexican barrios. A high school principal once told me the local school boards and city governments were overrun with John Birch Society members and other conservatives. My father looked out of place at this meeting. He was relatively short and brown-skinned and wore a buttoned shirt and slacks. The other men were tall, many gray-haired, in business suits and ties. I saw how awestruck my father looked among them. I was livid. To me, these men didn't deserve the respect of most people, let alone my father. I could see they cared little about his presence. They tolerated him, but he was invisible, as were the many working-class Mexicans surrounding their sterile suburbs. Their words at the meetings were declarations of war against radicals, hippies, and peaceniks. They were declarations of war against people like me. So I had a hard time with my own family. I want to read you another thing. What I ended up doing to get out of the gang life is I worked in industry. And I know that all the whole state of Michigan and all this Midwest is a big rust belt. I know how the industry that was here and is gone, most of it, a good number of it. LA, people don't realize, is still, but was the largest manufacturing center of the whole country. People think of LA as just Hollywood and Disneyland, but it's actually had a lot of steel mills. It had auto plants. It still has the largest harbor in the whole country. And the only way that I could survive in those days, in the mid-'70s, was working industry. So that's what I did. I ended up working in a steel mill for 4 years, and I'm going to read you a little bit about that. Working at the steel mill was a fiery initiation. Heat, racket, exhaustion, drinking, people killed. This was Bethlehem, an icon in industrial LA. Many generations had already lived, worked, and died with steel in their blood. I was hired in the fall of 1974, a couple of months after getting married. I began to mull over the generations that would follow me. I actually thought this was the best job in the whole world, and there would be a whole mess of people following me that would end up in this place. It died like really soon after I got hired. 3 shifts with thousands of workers kept Bethlehem's LA plant moving. I entered the mill's high gates with a metal identification plate and a keychain. This got me a time sheet with my name and employee number. My job was to enter every nook and cranny of the greasy monster machines, forges, furnaces, rolling mills, and pumps armed with a grease gun and a copper piping day in and day out, 8 hours a day, and make sure every fitting, button, oil line, roller, and gear was properly oiled and greased. This was the job they called oiler greaser, which I actually hated that name. I thought it was kind of derogatory, but that's what we were called. But the danger lever, that was another matter. We placed locks on the electrical switches to all the machines, locks with our names and employee numbers on them to inform others we were working there. No one could pull those switches on without breaking the locks. We had to go deep into pits, like below the forging mills, which had miles of grease and slag from the red-hot ingots of steel that were rolled through. We often climbed 80 feet up the electric furnaces, most of which were about 300 degrees despite hours of cooling down, to grease what they called the eccentric wheels of the ingot cranes. A fellow worker, whether he liked you or not, had to hold on to your feet as you stretched out under railings, praying that this dude wouldn't let you go by accident or a sour disposition. So I'm going to just push through this because I want to get into some of the stuff, hardcore stuff. But I do want to talk about my son who was born. I was 20 years old when my oldest son was born. At 18, 19, I pretty much left the gang life and drugs. At 20 years old, I got married. And my first wife was just 2 months at the high school when we married. And then right that same year or soon after, my son was born. So let me just tell you about that part because this was very important for me. Actually, I don't even know where I have it. Let me just tell you what I think the real story was. Okay, here it is. My first wife was named Camila. Camila and I moved into a cottage among a row of cottages that face each other in another neighborhood. It was a 1-bedroom, 1-bath mash box. The place needed work. I redid the plumbing in the bathroom. The landlords, an old Mexican couple, decided we were okay. They reduced our rent when I agreed to fix whatever needed fixing. My work skills proved to be handy over the years. Also, Camila had a surprise for me. She was pregnant. Yes, we fought often, but we also made up. A baby. Everything seemed to fall into place as soon as I heard this. A baby, my dream. And then when he was born, we brought him home. His name was Ramiro. Ramiro slept so much. One night, with Camila resting, I held him. He had been out for hours. I wondered now if he had symptoms of fetal alcohol syndrome, but there was no way to know at the time. Camila wasn't a drinker like me, but she drank during the pregnancy. But again, we had no idea. As I gazed upon Ramiro, I began to cry. I'm not entirely sure why. It was a mixture of happiness and concern. The boy looked stern, even with closed eyelids, and he had hardly any hair on his head, like an old man. For a few minutes, I thought Ramiro wouldn't wake up. He was born underweight. He was like close to 4 pounds, and they had to keep him for a little while. I put the infant next to my face, and tears streamed down. Even though I had no God to appeal to, I prayed, "Save my son. You can do anything to me, but save Ramiro. He deserves a better life than I ever had. He deserves to be something." I just want to mention that because when you're in the gang life or drugs, sometimes babies transform you. Sometimes it doesn't, but it did me. I really felt that I couldn't be that person anymore that I was. But the problem was that I didn't know that this world would call me back. That's why it's called that. The addictions would come back. The rages would call me back. After I let go of the drugs for 7 years, I was on heroin. I ended up drinking for 20 years. And that eventually got to be worse. I ended up raging a lot, where I couldn't hold relationships. I've been married 3 times and lived with 2 other women, and I'm saying this, I'm not bragging, in case anybody thinks that's what I'm doing. It's really about how I couldn't hold relationships. And my first wife, after all my promises that I would be there for my kids, we broke up when my son ended up being 2.5 years old, and my daughter was only 10 months old. And I didn't really raise them. So I ended up abandoning my kids. And I'm telling you this because this is part of the story. It was very hard to be able to be the person that should have been. And this is important because I think that we have to be patient with people who go through this. And it's going to be hard. And maybe they're going to make a mistake. But I wanted you to know what I had to go through. One of these decisions I made, though, was I needed to leave that industrial work. I needed to get out. So I want to read you this one section about when I made that decision. One night, I stood on the bridge of a shut-down overhead crane overlooking the electric furnaces, 30 feet above the furnace floor. My partner, his name is Curly, and I were working on the motors. I took a break where Curly went to get parts, my blue hard hat scuffed, my tools and uniform greasy, stained, my face dark, dirt in the developing creases, eyes squinting. One of the furnaces was pouring molten slag into heavy cast iron cars on tracks. The sparks went everywhere. The whining wisp of sulfur dust built up like thunderclouds. I felt I was in mourning. The poems I tried to draw out of me weren't coming. I had difficulty writing. My journals were mostly scribbling, meaningless notes, scattered images, a few lines of a poem unfinished. I felt the poetry dying inside. I faced another crossroads. Do I continue this mill life, the disconnection with words, the pathos of a sunken existence? Or do I go for the images, the words, the stories, regardless of the cost? One meant I'd have bread on the table, bills paid, my strange wife less upset. The other meant I'd be out of work, struggling, getting rejected, everybody around me resentful. Somehow, with no more love, no more intact family, few political pressures to do more, I had to choose between the barely making it survival mode and the graceful anguish of an artist. And I made that choice. I walked out of Bethlehem Steel, which is a very difficult thing to do when it's the only job that you can have. And I started to want to be a writer. And I won't get into some of the things, but what happened is I walked into this weekly newspapers in East LA and said, I want to write. And the people said, oh, good. Nobody ever comes in here for that, but you're welcome. But you also have to sweep the floors, answer the phones, and take out the trash. I did all that, and I wrote. And I started my writing life as a journalist. I do want to read another section that I think is a very important part of this book. And this is one that I think was the hardest thing to write about. My father, who I had always issues with, turned out to be a pedophile. And I'm going to speak about this. It's very difficult. Just so you know, my family is very upset that I'm even bringing it up. And I met with them to let them know I was going to do this. I said, no surprises. I'm going to tell the story. And I basically told them that I have to tell the truth of this, but that I was going to do it as responsible as I could. I don't want to just make him out to be a terrible person. My dad, like a lot of people who molest kids or molest people, sometimes they look like nice people. You know what I'm saying? They're people you trust. they don't look like monsters with scarred faces for the most part. I'm sure that happens too, but it isn't like that. It's the hard thing is the people you love and trust. And when I found out, I didn't know that he was like this. I didn't grow up this way. I left the house when I was 15 years old. They threw me out. I didn't know that he was molesting my sisters. And my youngest sister is the one that opened up to it. And years later, I found out, and what he was trying to do was molest my daughter and a niece when they were small babies. And I took this very, very badly. I was going to actually get a gun and shoot my dad. And lucky for me, I was living with somebody who had some therapy and background. So she helped me get through this because it was really hard. And I decided that I wasn't going to hurt him, but I hated him. It was very difficult. My poor sister, my youngest sister, is the only one that actually spoke out. I have other sisters who won't talk about it. She's the only one, and she paid a big price for it. You understand what I'm saying? My mother and some family members ostracized her for speaking out. They knew my dad was bad. They kept him locked. My mom locked him in his room for the last 10 years of his life. Every once in a while she let him out, but most of the time she locked him in. Police actually found him trying to molest somebody, and they were going to put him away, but he was in his 70s and he had dementia. And they said, we don't want to put him in jail because he ain't going to make it. You got to get him in therapy. You got to do something. So she locked him in. He wouldn't go to therapy. But it was really terribly sad to see him that way. And I'm going to read you the very last part of this because the really hard part is, again, to hate somebody you love. You understand what I'm getting at? It's all complicated. To this day, again, my family is having a hard time with this. I'm standing by this. Again, I'm not here to hurt the family. I'm not even here to hurt him. But if he's going to have any legacy and any good out of what terrible things he did, it's going to be that we're going to bring this issue up. There's too many people I work with, so many kids, gang kids, that have the same story, and they can't talk about it. It's one of these things nobody talks about. And the only reason we should talk about it is because we need to begin to heal from these things, to change. So let me read you a little bit about this one section. And it starts off with me, well, I'll just go ahead and read it. Who knows how long my father had been messing with kids? My father must have led a double life for years, even decades. Or it's possible he finally acted on long harbored feelings and impulses, all internal brakes gone. He was in his early 70s when the police brought him home that day, his sense of right and wrong askew. Once I visited Dad's room when he wasn't there. My mom and Dad had separate rooms. They always had separate rooms. I thought it was really weird because I grew up with them not staying together, and I would go visit friends, and they would say, oh, that's my mom and Dad's room. I go, your mom and dad have the same room? I thought it was weird, but it turned out I was weird. We were weird. All around the room, my mother wanted me to see how his mind had splintered. All around his room were mounds of papers, junk mail, coupons, unopened envelopes, much of these sticking out of drawers and piles on the floor in a shapeless heap in a corner. On a wooden bedpost was a ball made of hundreds of rubber bands. Cereal boxes were thrown about, some half full, most empty. There were writing tablets on top of a dresser filled with numbers without pattern, over and over for pages on end. My father was obsessed with killing flies. The white curtains my mother had put up were spotted with blood specks. Dad's dementia was probably why his pedophilia was now pitilessly revealed, and none of us was prepared for the damage, least of all me. I stopped wanting to waste my father, although my hatred toward him lasted for years. This part of my story has been the most painful to recount. I can't speak for any family members since they have their own ways of dealing with this, yet I'm sure many of them would prefer this story never be shared, that the facts be buried, the incidents forgotten, the horror of living with pedophilia and other abuse pushed aside. But this is the chronicle of too many families, too many communities, where people keep their mouths shut, the devastation bottled up, and consequently healing cannot occur. To come out stronger from this, I had to go through these wounds. My father passed away in 1992 from a quickly spreading stomach cancer. He was in his early 80s. I was in Chicago at the time. I told my mother, although not anyone else in the family, why I wouldn't come to his funeral. She seemed to understand. At one point before my father succumbed to the disease, I called Mom. My dad was at home, unable to speak, breathing his last. My mother requested that I say something to him, even if he couldn't respond. I didn't know what to say. although I heard his shallow breathing. All of my life, I wanted another father. Yet as I recall, he brought books home for me to read, even books I didn't care about. He showed me how to play chess, another obsession of his. And despite spending long hours away, he came home. Most of my young friends had no fathers. This was the only father I knew, the one given to me by forces vaster and more mysterious than I could ever comprehend. So I told him something he never told me. I love you, Dad. My mother said he had a reaction, ever so slight, to his words. The next day, he was gone. You can imagine my family is trying to get over it. It's really sad, but I am doing this for my youngest sister, who, before I met with my family, called me. She's living in Idaho. In fact, when she called, she was homeless in Idaho. She now has a home, but she couldn't find a home. And she's got some psychiatric issues. I'm not entirely sure what. She takes meds, and she's got lupus, very bad. She's suffering. She's 4 years younger than me, and I hate to see her this way. I was the closest to her of all my siblings. But she called me to say, whatever you do, tell the truth. Don't stop. She's been backing me up against everybody else. So I'm going to do it for her, if not anybody else. I'm going to switch really quickly to the end here to my son, who got into gangs when he moved to Chicago to live with me from LA. And he got it, like me, got into it heavy in the violence. He got into shooting people. And as many of you know, he did serve. He was given 28 years when he was 21 years old for 3 counts of attempted murder. He ended up doing 13 and a half of those years, and this is why now he's released. But I want to read to you one of the things that called me back was rage. The way that I mediated the rage, I didn't know I was doing this, was through drinking. I was one of these people that when I drank, I was the happiest person in the world. When I wasn't drinking, I was very terrible. And I didn't know how bad it was. So one of the worst things that happened was I sobered up. It was really rough, and it was really bad for my family, from everybody. My poor wife went through hell and back with me, but I had to hang in there with it because I knew if I stayed, I would eventually get better. But man, it was the roughest thing. Raging, mad, so much stuff happened. So I'm going to read you an incident in which I actually got, anyway, I'm going to read you this thing. I got in a big fight with my son. I was sobering up, but it really drove me nuts. And I'm just going to read you this section. One night, I lay down in the second floor bedroom unable to sleep. I had insomnia for some time, mulling over work and home predicaments as well as how to make ends meet. Later, as I dozed off, I heard Ramiro and the mother of his oldest daughter shouting. I got terribly annoyed. They were outside just below my window. I got up, put on my pants and shirt, and stormed down the stairs. I confronted Ramiro. I then heard him say, "F you." Me? That's when I lost it. The thing was, he didn't say this to me. He was still arguing with the mother of his child, but I didn't get that part. Everything in front of me turned red. My head erupted in lights. I couldn't see straight. I rushed up to the bedroom. Trini was there. Trini's my third wife, who's still my wife, by the way. Nervous, confused, not knowing what to do. I wanted her to stop me, but she couldn't. It wasn't her fault. She knew how I could get, and she had no strategies, no way to soothe the monster I'd become. I rushed back down 2 more flights to the basement bedroom where Ramiro had gone after my initial outburst. I got into my son's face, pushed him. I called him out. Ramiro tried to reason with me to calm me down, but he also had difficulties with rage. Soon we were both yelling. I dared Ramiro to fight me. I wanted an excuse to kick his ass. Ramiro wasn't much of a fighter. Eventually he would be, especially behind bars. By the way, a lot of kids in gangs, not I don't want to say all of them, aren't really good fighters, but they can shoot people. You understand what's happened? When I was in a gang, we had guns, but guns wasn't that important. You had to know how to fight. People respected you more if you knew how to put up your dukes. Now I know kids that can shoot people don't know how to fight or nothing, doesn't matter. I've known 8-year-old kids that have, I once stopped a kid walking down the street late at night with a Tech 9 in his coat. 8-year-old kids can kill people. It's changed because now there's guns everywhere, and anybody can get a hold of them. So anyway, he eventually learned to be a fighter behind bars, but up to that point, he wasn't much of a fighter. We took our arguing farther into the basement, away from his room. Trini was behind me, trying to get me upstairs. Ramito's baby mama was trying to talk him into walking away. His daughter, not even 3, looked scared. I blocked all this out, locked inside a frenzied state. Then Ramiro picked up a hedge trimmer from the garden tools in the basement. He threatened me with it. Go ahead, use it, I said, provoking him. Ramiro came at me. I moved, part of the hedge trimmer scraping the side of my belly, drawing a little blood. But I also sensed something else. My son was trying hard not to hurt me. I have known if he was going at me with all his strength. He wasn't. Ramiro just wanted to keep me off him. That's when I realized what a stupid ass I was. At this point, my granddaughter's mother, who was small in stature and relatively thin, tackled Ramiro. I saw her fly at him from another section of the basement. They both landed on boxes and plastic bags filled with clothing, the hedge hammer trimmer falling to the ground. Aware now that Ramiro was making sure I didn't get hurt, seeing his daughter distressed, and then her mom risking herself to pull my son away, I stopped. I had no more words, no more rage, no more energy. I walked away and back up the stairs, pushing past Trini, who looked unhurt and unsure. Things were never quite the same after that. And unfortunately, soon after that, he was involved with these shootings. And then I had to deal with his arrest, a year and a half in the county jail until we waited for the conviction and sentencing. He was facing 40 years to life. He shot at a truck driver and almost killed him. He ended up surviving, but he had shot at 2 police officers. In the state of Illinois, you get a life sentence for shooting at 1 police officer, 20 years to life. And he shot 2, so he could get 40 years to life. What happened is we spent all that time stopping the life sentence. We finally convinced the judge to give him 28 years. And this is very unheard of. I understood, I may be wrong, I haven't done the research, that he may have been the first kid in the state of Illinois not to do a life sentence for shooting at police officers. But he also did good time, because in the state of Illinois now, you have to do 85 to 100% of your time, but it was declared unconstitutional when he was convicted, which is just the way things fell. I didn't even know. So he actually could do half the time with good time, which he did. And then he got 6 months, even less, because of overcrowding. So after 13 and a half years, he's finally released. And I will have to say that my son, even in the prison, decided to get out of gangs and drugs himself. And I think what he did, he finally realized that my sobriety was real. He saw that I was changing. I think it helped him know that I could change, because I think with fathers, most fathers don't change. You understand that? They just don't, no matter what you do, and you kind of have to live with it. He's not going to change. I had to change. I couldn't be like my dad. I saw that I needed to do it for myself, and then I began to see all my kids change because of that. So I'm going to read you one last thing, then I want to open it up to you for your questions and answers. And this is the thing that my son wrote when he got out of prison. I asked him to write something. I'm going to share it with you because I think it was very beautiful. And I hope that this can spark some discussion here. This is for my son, Ramiro. I had over 13 years of psychological warfare. My mind has been a battlefield with many casualties, disconnections, reconnections, everything new. It feels good to see my kids, my family, and everyone who has supported me. It feels good to know that on this next journey of my life, I don't have to do it alone. This is a new journey for everybody. All the hardships, the struggles were not just my own. While I did time, everyone else did life. As I stepped out of the prison door and saw my family and friends standing in front of me, I didn't want to look behind me. Behind me was dissolution. In front of me was absolution. Now I'm going forward, taking advantage of all my support, not afraid to ask for help. For too long, I was trying to do everything alone. I was selfish and weak, full of pain and full of pride, holding on to so much anger, never knowing what I was truly angry at. That's all over with. All that sadness and hurt, I wanted to be gone. I look into my children's eyes, and all I can do is smile. I wake up with a smile. I walk everywhere with a smile. I smile because I finally made it home. Thank you. So, in many ways, that's why the book has a subtitle of an Odyssey, because as you know, from the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, That's probably the foundation of Western literature. It's all about coming home, right? The whole struggle to come home. And really, home isn't so much a place in a place so much as a home inside you. Finding yourself, finding where you belong, and knowing that you carry it wherever you go. And that, to me, is really the struggle. Really, all literature somewhere has that theme about getting home somehow. And so that's why it's the Odyssey, and that's why I wanted to make sure that people could get that in all this pain and struggle and that roller coaster ride we were in, somehow we were going to find where our real home was, and we were going to find our place, and we were going to gather ourselves, and we would find that character that helped us carry it through. So that's my book, and I want to open it up to you now for some questions and comments. I know somebody's going to shut us up eventually, but I want to go as far as we can go. And we do have mics, so people can actually get up and, say their question or comment, and whoever wants to start. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Shelley Rocher, but we met earlier today. I'm a Spanish professor here. One of the themes that you talked about today at the Brown Bag Luncheon was finding a cause. And you also mentioned just now finding your calling. I think one of the causes or our callings here at Aquinas is service. And one of the classes I teach is a service learning class, and we mentor kids at Cesar Chavez Elementary School. And I think a few of my students are here. If you're in that class, can you stand up and just say hello?
Great. Well, I'm going to give you all hands. Great.
So I was wondering if you could reflect on the idea of service to your community and gaining a sense of cause or a calling.
Well, here's what I think. Everybody's got a calling, and it's your own purpose. You have your own specific destiny that you're going to go towards. And destiny is one of those things that you have within you, but you have to choose to go there. You understand that? It's not quite like fate. Fate is generally things that happen that you have no control over. Fate is the cards that you're dealt, but destiny is really important that you begin to move towards it yourself. And but here's the reason why I think people need to find it, because they need to find it for why? To make money and be rich and famous? No. The real reason behind it is to give back to your community through your own gifts. You understand? Once you find out what your gifts are, what you're here to do, you got to give it to the world. And yeah, some people will be compensated and be honored and recognized. That's all great. I'm not against it. But generally, that's not why you do it. You do it because that's the fulfillment circle. You're finding that space, their calling, what are you here to do? All kinds of art. Even teaching is an art. Even being a mechanic can be an art, if that's what it is. Whatever you find yourself in, find the art in it. And then you say, this is what I love. And then use it to help bring some joy, enhancement, beauty in the world. You know what I'm getting at. That's what we need to do, and that's what the cause is. It isn't so much that you're going to change the world, even though that's part of it too. Some people, that's their cause. But some of it could be just, I'm going to make this world a little better. Service is part of it, giving to people. I just think it's just so integral to be part of it. Instead of what happens, we become individualized, which is good, but we don't get actualized, which means you actually have to be seen by others. And you yourself have to give to others so you can be seen. It's a community as well as individuals. See what I'm saying? Individual growth, development, connected to the development and hopefulness of a community. And this is why I do the arts, because I find it to be the most quickest, fastest means to get to those passions, those practices, those beautiful callings, and get people to give back. So that's my thinking on it. It's not just my thinking, by the way. I didn't make nothing up. I learned from others. So, it's very ancient thinking, actually. Thank you. Anybody else?
Kind of going off of that, especially with your book, Living La Vida Loca, being banned, and knowing in a lot of schools, and knowing that you needed to get this message out and getting this art out in you for the world to see, to help your community and help the world, really. How did you deal with it being banned and people not wanting their children reading it? How did you deal and kind of handle that?
Well, there's two things I had to do. One, I had to agree with one part of it. The book is a hardcore book. And sometimes people didn't tell people that. So some parents were very upset because it's got very graphic scenes, sexual, violent, bad words. And the reason why it does that is because this is a book about real life, and I just couldn't soften it up. I just couldn't. It just wasn't going to work. I tried to make it as literary as I could, so it wasn't just just a bunch of terrible things. And there's a lot of other good things in it. But the point is that it had to be hardcore. So some parents were getting upset that nobody told them. I really do think that parents should be told, and hopefully won over to why their kids should read it. The thing about it is that people underestimate young people. A lot of kids know this, they get it, even if they never lived through it, they understand what's going on. A lot of kids were living through it, and this is why teachers were giving them to the kids, because the kids could relate to it. Again, the reason why it's the most stolen book in the LA area, and maybe other areas, is because it's one book that people can find connection to. So I find that to be very important. I hope that parents, teachers, and administrators and people can work with the kids with this book. That's better than just to give them the book. You see what I'm saying? The other thing I also think is important is that we open up to those stories because they're not really out there in a big way. And what I didn't like about a lot of the books that were in schools is that most of them are either fantasy books or books that have no relationship to the real life. I'm not against some of these books. Mark Twain, anything that's written, it's good. Everything's important. But hardly any modern contemporary books, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, wow, we need something that can get you into the world, because you need to have a book that also guides you. You know what I'm saying? Where a book can teach you as well as a teacher, as well as a parent. So I think that we need more books that really get into some of these issues. We're losing so many kids because they don't want to read because the books don't have anything meaningful for them. But they do really want to read. When you hit them, they do. Just give them something powerful. So I think the other side is we need to have more of these kind of books, and we need to fight for them. And so I am very much supportive of the American Library Association to fight against the censorship and fight against banned books. I don't think any book should be banned. I think that if they're really rotten, nobody's going to read them. But if they're really good, they need to be read even when they have hard things to do. So I think we have to fight for our books. So thank you. Anybody else?
Mic around to you, okay?
Thank you for
need to
being here. I
leave-
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. The books are for sale out in the hallway there, and there will be some signing if you do want to get some books, okay? I just know that some of you have to get to your studies. And I know you want to hear more about what's gone on with Luis,
Yeah.
so
Okay, so I guess we got any more questions?
we'll have them in just a second, okay? We're going to let the room clear. I knew we'd get more questions. While the folks are leaving, I'm going to just mention that on February 9th, 2012, Thylius Moss, who is a poet and a very different type of poet, avant-garde, multimedia. She's feeding me my lines, okay? And she'll be here on February 9th, same place. And we'd really love to have you all here so you can hear what she has to say. She actually does a lot of media with her work, so we're hoping she comes to Aquinas. So if you see this lady going around and doing some things here before some weekend, look at her picture, and you might see her walking on campus because she'll be here before that time, okay? Now, are we ready to ask more questions? I will bring the mic to you.
My name is Bob. You were talking about rage. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about where it came from. Did you experience it as a kid in your family or the gangs or whatever?
Yeah, I think the source of it was first sibling abuse, which is another thing people don't talk about. People talk about parental abuse, but if you have older brothers, sometimes sisters, but generally it's an older brother that beats you up and knocks you around, it really affects people. I had a brother who was only 3 years older than me, but he really knocked me around. He was really abusive, and always when I talk about it. Just to tell you right now, if you were to meet him, he's like the nicest guy you ever want to meet. And he knows what he did because, we talked about it since then, but we didn't talk about it for years. Anyway, I went through that kind of abuse for my brother. In fact, I don't mention it always running, but one time he took me to his friends and had his friends beat me up. I mean, it's like, I was just like somebody to be knocked around. There was a lot of abuse at home, but mainly my mother was the one. My dad wouldn't touch us by abusing us. He had other problems. He didn't get involved with us. It's really weird. But my mom did. And my mom, frustrated person that she was, used to beat us up a lot. Now, I never think of it as abuse, but I do know it is abuse. It's just that we didn't know. My mom learned that from Mexico, and she just did it to straighten us out. It actually worked for my brothers and sisters. It didn't work for me because none of them got into gangs and drugs, and maybe that's what stopped them. My mom was really rough, but it got me resentful and angry, and it didn't really help me. The other kind of abuse was the abuse we were getting in the streets. Police officers constantly beating up on us. Teachers used to beat up on us for speaking Spanish, for example. There was a lot of capital punishment in schools, as you know. So for some reason, there was a lot of abuse. And this has come years later, I didn't know where this was coming from. Some people handle it differently. I handle it by becoming very violent. What people say that I do have a disorder, and what it is post-traumatic stress. That's what I have. I've had people, I've never gone to therapy or nothing, but I've had people who are therapists who know me, who said, this is what you got. They've diagnosed me this way. I don't know. But they think it was my response to post-traumatic stress, that whatever I went through. And again, people respond to these differently. But what happens when I got in the gang, besides the drugs, I was kind of mediating it. When I got into the most violent aspect of it. Shooting people, firebombing people's homes, stabbing people. These are the things that I did. Besides being on murder's roll, at 16, at 17, I was arrested for attempted murder, in which 4 people were shot. I was in and out of different facilities because a lot of it was violence. So anyway, I think that's where it was. If there was any way to find a source, that was probably it, the abuse.
One more question?
Okay.
Luis, my name's Henry, and I guess I come from the we society, not the me society, and I believe in economic and social justice and being an activist to an activist. What's your sense of what's going on right now with Occupied Wall Street, where you have nonviolence in a community that's being aggravated by the police department and people of power, and like Gandhi said, that first they ignore you, which took 3 weeks for anybody to even know what's going on. Then they ridicule you, like Fox Noise does now, and then they fight you, and then you win. What is your feeling of what's going on now?
Well, let me just say, I think that everybody is being affected by what's happening now with the economic shifts, because when I was talking about that industry leaving, we're getting that back into that. The shift that we went through in the 80s was as momentous as when we went from agriculture to industry more than 100 years before. And that is from the industrial world into the electronic digital world. And it's been momentous for us now. And this is where people don't recognize that this is part of the problem we're facing, is that you're not going to have those jobs anymore. You're not going to have the same kind of jobs. The whole world is being changed, and it's not just us. This is global. Globalization is electronics in this stage of capitalism, and electronics is changing everything. But we're not aligning ourselves to it. You understand? And so what you're seeing is old ways of doing things where industry wasn't making money, banks were making money. Banks never used to be the big money makers. Now they are. And they have to make money totally on speculation and dividends and things that are some of it made up. You're seeing people trying to make money off houses and our backs and work without having no production. You understand? So everything's got to shift. So what I'm seeing, these young people who are in Occupy Wall Street, even if they don't understand all that, they sense it, they feel it, and they know they have to fight against something big, not just the small little piecemeal things. What people don't, I was in Wall Street, by the way, about 3 weeks ago, there and Occupied, and I wanted to hear the young people. And I mentioned, I have a blog that I wrote about this, but also the Progressive magazine put it out on the media. And what I basically said is that the difference between other things is that these young people have a big dream. You understand? They don't want programmatic things. They don't want, agendas. They want this big dream. And what's that big dream? It's to end the hunger and the pain and the suffering. They really want to end it. They don't know how to do it, but they want to end it. So my feeling is we need to bring that big dream with some real practical stuff. Somehow there has to be a nexus between them, and that's what the battle is now. But you are right. They're trying to be nonviolent, and and what's going to test it is when they're getting beat up. Right now, Oakland is getting hit really hard. As they're getting attacked, whether they can maintain the integrity of their nonviolence. You understand? That's what Gandhi did. That's what Martin Luther King did to the very end. That's what's going to be the test of it. Can we stay nonviolent and still stay on task, still stay with the direction of where this is going? What is the direction? I really think this direction is a complete overhaul of the economic social system. It really is. People don't want to see that. They're scared of it. They're afraid. It's a scary thing because I don't think anybody has the answer. You see what I'm saying? We're all going to be going in this direction. And it's going to be scary, but I think it's necessary. And I'm trying to get people not to be scared. It was necessary, much as we love the farmers and that they had to move out of the farm. That was devastating. It was devastating for people who had to go through that. It's as necessary as any major change that we go through. But I think the difference is that we can be conscious and cohesive and aware about this process, that if we want it, we can really begin to put some thinking, imagination. This is why I'm pushing the imagination and creativity. This is why this is a time not for order, as people want it, because it's old order. This is a time to be creative and imaginative. What can we do that's different, that can align ourselves to what the world is telling us we need to go, right? So let me just end with this two things because I really believe this is the future of where we're going. What are we going to? We're trying to go to a healthy world and healthy relationships, right? No more war, because that's not healthy for anybody. No more destroying the world through economic or oil or anything, because that's not healthy for anybody. If you have a proper, healthy relationship with the earth, you're going to have a regenerative earth because the earth knows how to regenerate if you deal with it properly. If you don't, it will mess up. The same thing with relationships. If you have a proper, respectful, meaningful relationship with each other, you can, bountiful what can happen. That's the direction we're going. Capitalism isn't going to do it because capitalism doesn't care about the earth. It doesn't. It just wants to exploit it and doesn't care about relationships because, again, it's about exploiting it. How can you get people making billions and billions of dollars the way they're doing now in the face of so many people that don't have that much? You can't keep doing that. It doesn't make sense because they're making billions of dollars off nickels and dimes. They're not making it out of big things. They're making it out of just robbing people legally. You know what I'm saying? These banks are robbing us legally. And you know what I'm talking about. I don't have to make this up. You know that this is not workable the way they're doing things. And I will tell you that I don't think the Republicans or the Democrats have answers for this. There may be some good people in both parties, but they don't got the answer. This is really a time to be imaginative and creative. So let me leave you with that. If we do anything in this world, remember the two main things is to have that relationship respectfully and meaningful with the earth. Because the earth will take care of us if we're able to respect it and its laws and how it's run. It will regenerate and give us food, bountiness, everything. But also with each other. And if anything, this is the time to be more in the spiritual idea of what even the Bible says, treat others as you want to be treated. That, to me, is a generative way to relate. And that's what we need to have now. And it's going to be against capitalism. It's going to be for a whole new world. So thank you all very, very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.